Well, good morning, children. Today we're going to continue on our story that we had last week, and we're going to work on the notion that God helps us to do the work that He gives us to do. So last week we were talking about Nehemiah, and he was a cupbearer for the king. A cupbearer was somebody that tasted the king's food and drank from their cup before they ate, just to make sure nobody was going to poison them. And if you remember the story from last week, or if you watched it and such, you'll remember that Nehemiah had heard that the walls of his beloved city of Jerusalem had not been rebuilt after many, many years, at least 70 years, that there was time for them to rebuild the city walls, and it had not been done, and so he was very sad. So he actually went and talked to the king, and the king not only gave him, it said yes to him going back and being able to help rebuild the city walls, but he gave him materials to take back with him. He gave him letters for the different people along the way so that he'd have safe passage. And he even sent soldiers and such with him to go and be able to protect him, to make sure that he got from the city where he was to the city of Jerusalem. So when Nehemiah got to the broken walls of Jerusalem, he knew that there were some people in the surrounding villages, some leaders of the other towns that were around there, that were not happy with the fact that Jerusalem was being rebuilt. And so he went out and he kind of went around the city, and he had some of the people there kind of show him around at night, so that he wouldn't draw attention to himself, just to see how bad the city walls were. So he kind of developed a plan, and the next morning he went and spoke with a bunch of the leaders of the projects there, of who was still there in Jerusalem at the time, and he spoke to them and he told them of his plan to rebuild the city walls. He was worried that without the city walls they wouldn't be protected, and so against the armies that might come against them and such. So obviously some of the houses must have been rebuilt within the city because there were families and such living there. But at that time the walls were in terrible disrepair. So he made a plan, and he set the people up to start working on the walls. So Nehemiah sorted the people out, and he put them all along the wall, and everybody was willing to help. The mothers, the children, it didn't matter what their abilities were, what their jobs were and stuff. Everybody said, we can help. So they began to work on the wall, and they began to pick up the rocks and put them back into the buildings and restore the height of the walls. And two of the main opposers to the building of the wall was Sanballat, a man named Sanballat, and another leader named Tobiah. And they would come past and they would ridicule the people as they worked. But the Israelites, they just kept working on the wall, and the walls began to take shape, and they got better looking all the time. And so then Sanballat and Tobiah, they got kind of worried. So they started to make secret plans to attack the Israelites and to discourage them from building on the wall. Well, Nehemiah heard about this, so he posted soldiers, and he had the soldiers out there already before Sanballat and Tobiah could actually fully plan their attack. And it discouraged them from planning the attack. In fact, some of the workers, they would even be working with a hammer in one hand. Let me get a hammer here. You might have a hammer in one hand and a sword in the other, while they were ready to defend themselves if they needed to while they were working on the wall. Well, remember, this wall had been down for many, many years. 90 years, maybe even closer to 100 years. And the doors had all been burned. Everything that could be burned was burned. It was torn down. It was no longer there. But Nehemiah had found favor in the eyes of God. So the one thing that Nehemiah did is he really depended on God to help him do this work that God had put in his heart to do. And so Nehemiah was able to rebuild that whole wall, and it was a long wall. They figured this wall was at least 8 feet thick and 20 to 30 feet high. So it was a good guard wall against the armies that might attack them later on. And of course, Jerusalem was no small city. So it was a long ways around. But after all these years that this city had been down, Nehemiah was able to rebuild these walls in 52 days. That's less than 2 months. And God's favor was with them. They didn't have to go to war. They probably had some small battles. Nehemiah had known that because they were so spread out, he set up a signal that if they heard a trumpet sound, that everyone was to go to the area where they heard the trumpet, because there was probably a battle going on and they needed all the people to come help. But because of the way that God instructed Nehemiah and Nehemiah obeyed, they were able to rebuild this wall in less than 2 months. I just want to encourage you that if God has inspired you to do something, to continue to depend upon Him to show you how to do it. Because God is faithful and He will teach you step by step how to do the job that He puts in your heart to do. I just pray you have a good week this week, and we will see you next time. God bless you.